I am the IT director for Community Partners. We are in Dover, which is the next town up. We're the ones George said we're 10 minutes away. So that's where we work. We are behavioral health, developmental services, and we do early supports and services. So we're a $26 million organization. I've been there for 15 years. Rachel has been with the organization for 10 and 3 in my department. She was in the billing department, and I was lucky enough to have a billing manager come in for about 6 months that decided she didn't like Rachel, so I was able to step in and grab Rachel, which was very beneficial, as you'll see with the things she's done. Because one of the difficulties we have in the IT department is we do ones and zeros really well. We can keep the network going, we can keep the servers up, but understanding what the billing department is doing, understanding what the clinical staff are doing, and what would be helpful for them has always kind of been a struggle for myself and my staff. So bringing Rachel down into our department really helped us. We gave her some more technical skills. She had done some technical things up in the billing department further than anyone else we'd had in the billing department. That's why I kind of knew I'd like to get her if I had the opportunity. But she's automated quite a few different processes that we used to do manually. So she saved us about an FTE at this point, which is a full-time employee, which for us with benefits is about $50,000. So over a span of years, that actually adds up to a decent amount of money. We also have done some other automation outside of what she's going to show you today that has also helped with some of those things. But today it's really going to be the billing piece that she's going to be showing you and what we've done there. Are you okay?
I had them in the wrong order.
I think I hit on everything that we were going to say, though. But I will speed you up to where we are. I think it's okay. We're 430 employees currently. We'd be 431 without what we did. There's our info there. And you are up.
Thank you. So the first question that I could come up with when trying to put this together is, should you automate? How to know when you should automate. Not everything should be automated. Not everything can be done without having someone sign off on it. Not everything is automatically something that no one else needs to look at. So the questions that I ask myself when we look at whether or not we can automate things is the logic of what you're entering, what you're adding, or what you're updating always the same? And can that change or that addition be made without confirming with staff? And if the answer is yes to both of those, then my choice was that we can automate. Working with the data in Revenue Manager, I found myself asking IT for reports, and the report would tell me what the data was and what the data needed to be changed to. And my job was to print out that report and manually make those changes. I didn't have to check with anybody. I didn't have to check with clinicians. So as I started to work with IT, I realized that we could automate that, and I wouldn't have to do it manually. So in the first example that I thought of is I tried to think of something that everybody does. Everybody posts over activities. And if you were in this room this morning, the woman doing the presentation this morning actually touched upon that a little bit. They use a stored procedure to tag and post over their activities. And so do we. For our processes in our agency, there's a lot of stuff that we want to follow different rules when we post them over. For our activities that bundle, we want to leave those out for just a little bit because we want to give the chance for other staff to enter their activities so everything bundles together. Because we don't like reprocessing and recoupments and billing it correctly. We want to do it right the first time. We also internally have a department that generally needs a few more days for someone to review their data before we can say, we think this is ready to bill. So we leave those activities out there. But if you're familiar with CDT and posting over, you have very little control in CDT on what you're actually posting over. So we decided that we were going to take all the logic that we wanted, all the rules we wanted to follow, and we were going to put them into a stored procedure. And so that's what we did. We don't have to worry about, are we tagging and untagging things that we shouldn't? Are we tagging things maybe someone forgot to sign their note, we don't want to tag those and post them over. So how can we do that? So the first thing we did to start testing the process is we created a SQL select statement of all of the records that we considered ready to post over, which for those of you not familiar with SQL, looks like that. It's very colorful. This is what a select statement looks like. So there's a selection. Here's a selection of the logic we use to identify when we determine an activity ready to post over. It's a lot of code, but you just have to write it once. And in the current versions of CDT, I don't think you can even put in code anymore when you're tagging and posting over. I think you have a cutoff date now, and that's it. I'm not sure if maybe in 10.4 they'll put that back, but that's a lot of code to fit in that little box we used to have. And we don't want to post everything over. So when you're ready to change that to posting over, it's really as simple as setting one particular column to a value of P. That's all posting over does behind the scenes, is it takes the activities, that status underscore C column, and it changes the value from blank or from null to a P. So that's all we had to do. All we had to do was update active work, set the status to P. We put in a touch user of script, so we know a script did it, not an actual person. Touch date of get date, which is right now, exactly this minute. And then the from clause, or the where clause, is that select statement we wrote to identify everything. So we've already tested out our select statement. We already know that things that come up in there are considered OK. So that's the same statement we're going to use. And executing it, you can either schedule your stored procedures to run on hours, off hours, whenever you choose, or you can provide certain staff with a screen that has buttons on it in Windesi. Not sure how that's going to work in Form Designer. I don't know. I don't have any answers to that. But for the Windesi screens in RevMan, you can put a stored procedure right on the screen and staff can just push the button when they're ready. So for us, for this particular process, we decided we wanted to do it at 3 o'clock in the morning. Nobody's in the database other than emergency services. It's not interfering with when we have our backups running, and staff come in the next morning and everything's there. And here is an example on how we set up our buttons for our billers. It's a Windesi screen. We've set it up accessible through RevMan only. Each one of the buttons on the left, does this work? Oh, it does. Each one of these buttons on the left executes an individual stored procedure that we've written in our agency to automate processes. And then the button in the top will actually execute all of these. So for all of the processes we were able to automate for our billing processes, we were able to give our staff one button that does almost everything they need to get ready to do their daily processing. If they run into issues and they need to do one process at a time, they can, but for the most part, they are strictly using the one. All right. So the next example that I brought for us today, bulk Xero pays. So one of our managed care payers requires that a certain CAS segment, which is claim adjustment segment, that a certain CAS data in the 837, but does not require that we actually bill the primary insurance. So your case management. Medicare doesn't cover case management. We do not need to bill Medicare for every case management. But the managed care organization refuses to accept that secondary claim unless we put those CAS segments in our 837. So we had a choice. We can bill Medicare, waste their time, waste our time getting all of those denials, or we could choose the process that we actually went with. So we do create the charges. We process them to Medicare. We create the charges. And then we have a stored procedure that we run that enters all of those Xero pays so that it will waterfall down to the managed care organization and it will create those segments that we're missing. We don't want to wait for Medicare denials. We don't need to wait for Medicare denials. So the manual process that we were doing for this was we were using the auto apply cash feature. Is anyone familiar with using the auto apply cash feature in RevMan? It's a really great tool, actually. But in this scenario, we had to constantly enter in the limiting criteria, the pay source that we needed to Xero pay for, just the activity codes that we wanted to write off without billing. That's a lot of room for data entry errors. So we decided for this process, instead of using the auto-apply cash feature, which we use for other things, we automated it. So we created a stored procedure that enters the same transactions onto the grid without having to go through the process of making sure that you've entered the correct limiting criteria. The steps we took to get to that result, was basically the same. We created the select statement that resulted in what it would look like if we inserted those records. And that looks like this. So, good thing to note that all of this, well, not the select, but all of this except for the very last line, I stole this from the RevMan report summary on open claims. So when you hit that SQL button, when you run reports, instead of printing the report or previewing the report, you can actually get the SQL right from there. So rather than recreate the wheel, I stole it from there. I put in our particular codes, our particular pay sources, and if we use auto-apply cash, these are all the columns that it would insert. And we created the logic in how to decide what we're inserting. So basically, this select statement is a report of what needs to be data entered, or what the auto-apply cash feature would enter. So we turn that select statement into an insert in a stored procedure. We created a stored procedure that performs that insert into cash work. And just like the auto-apply cash, it will only create the entries onto the transaction grid. It will not process them for you. I'm sure that there's a way, but I personally would be too scared of breaking RevMan if I were to try to go that far. Echo has done a very good job in making sure that we don't edit their stored procedures, so I'm not going to assume that I know what they're doing. So for this particular one, it doesn't make sense to do this automatically or schedule it. It makes sense for when staff are ready, when staff have done their daily processing, to go ahead and execute it when they're ready. Any questions yet? Okay. The third example was adding services to process services. And this is, for us, kind of like the same thing as tagging and posting over. So we only want certain activities to tag and post over. We also only want certain activities to pull into process services daily. For some of our bundled activities, we may not need to leave them in the CDT active grid. We may be able to just put them in history. We don't have to worry about them. Staff are done. They've signed off on them. We don't want to process them yet. We want to hold them, especially with our bundling. Give people a chance to get in all of their activities. It saves our billing staff a lot of time by not having to reprocess, recoup, resubmit claims if we just hold those back. And you can use the limiting criteria on your process services screen in Revenue Manager to do all of that. But that's still entering all of those activities, leaving data entry errors, possibly processing services you weren't ready to process. So what we did is we turned that into a stored procedure. And all staff have to do is hit the button. They don't have to go through. It would take me 5 to 10 minutes to enter in all of the activity codes every time we were ready to process. They don't have to do that. They just have to hit the button. And this one was fun to write. This one was a little bit more complicated. It took me a while to figure out that the way RevMan works is the very first time you pull services into process services, it assigns your username a specific date and time. And so even though this says September 4th, 2013, that's my username. Every time I go to RevMan and I hit add services to grid, it's going to tag it with that date because that's the very first time I ever did it. I tried writing this to do get date, and every time I went to process services, it looked like my grid was completely blank. So this one was a lot of fun to write. So we have a lot of different logic in what we want to pull in, what we don't want to pull in. You know, we want to make sure that there's more than 14 days there, more than 14 days there. For these activities, we just want to make sure it's more than 10 days. If the location code is one of our rest homes, we want to hold it for a little while. a lot of different logic, and that's a lot of different batches to have to pull in to process services manually. It still works, but I would possibly make a lot of data entry errors if I had to pull in this date to this date with these codes, add to grid. Now go back, enter in your new date span and your new activity codes, add to grid, and then go back. And by the time all said and done, if I got a phone call or if I got interrupted, I may not remember what I was up to, and I may not wind up pulling in all the activities that we're supposed to be processing. So we created the stored procedure that would do it for them. And this is also one of the billing buttons that they had on that screen. So another example that we've used to automate is after we import our 835. So RevMan does import our 835s, and it imports them correctly to how we have our global mapping tool set up. But there are some transactions that we prefer that we update them prior to processing them. So this one does a lot of different things. So when it comes to the standard claim adjustment reason codes versus our internal reason codes, we find that we could have several different reason codes that all map to the same number. For example, your deductibles, your 835 comes in and the deductible reason code is 1/PR. Same thing for your cost of care. So we have both of those mapped. We have our cost of care reason code and our deductible reason code both mapped to the same number, and that's correct. But when we import our 835, it's going to pick the first one it finds alphabetically. It's doing what it's supposed to do. We prefer to break those out when we do our processing, so we've created a lot of different logic that after we import our Medicare 835, based on how we want it to look before we process it, we make all of those changes automatically. And we used to do them manually. We used to go to the transaction grid in RevMan and limit it by that batch and just scroll through and make the changes. And it just didn't make sense to keep doing that manually.
So you're doing this after you import the 835?
Yes.
You run that stored procedure, then they open up the transactions grid?
Yes. So what they'll do is, and it's just for Medicare for us, so they'll import their Medicare 835, they'll go to a screen that we've called billing buttons, because we're creative. They'll hit that button, and then they'll go back to their transaction grid. Actually, they can skip their transaction grid. They'll go to process transactions. They're ready to process it, or pre-process it to see if anything errors out. But rather than going to the transaction grid and making all those changes manually, we're able to just skip all of that. So the last example that we had today that might be applicable to more people is the balance forward versus unapplied. So we don't use balance forwards. We found it more efficient to spend time applying the payments through unapplied than to try to clean up the balances when a balance forward payment sneaks in there before we can make the needed adjustments. This happened to us a lot. When we first get our self-pay cash in, we do put it in as unapplied. We don't put it in as balance forward. We process it as unapplied. But as most of you probably know, when you reprocess a claim that has a self-pay payment attached to it, you can never touch it again. You can't get to that self-pay payment. It automatically turns into a balance forward and will go to wherever your balance is open. That's what was happening to us, and we found we had a really hard time cleaning up some self-pay balances. We had transactions that we needed to get in there before it waterfalled down, and it just wasn't working for us. So we worked with Echo on that one, and Echo showed us exactly how easy it was to turn. That's it. That's all it is. To turn a balance forward payment into an unapplied payment. Just change the code. That's it. Change the B to an A. But you can't do that on the RevMan side from RevMan itself. You have to do that behind the scenes. So we did this as both an overnight procedure and a billing button. So every time our staff do reprocessing, they go to those billing buttons and they hit that button just in case. And then all of our self-pay payments go into unapplied where we want them. And when we have posted all of the transactions back to where they were supposed to be, we will go put that payment back manually. we found that we spend less time doing that than we were doing with the balance forwards. We're trying to clean them up. It's not easy to clean up a balance forward once it's been applied. Anything? So the moral of the story is if you can write a report or a select statement that will result in what needs to be changed or updated or entered, and staff do not need to manually review those results before they can be implemented, then automate it. And keep in mind that the majority of the examples we brought today are more specific to RevMan processes. And the majority of the automations that we do tend to be more on the revenue side than the clinical side. But we do automations in CDT as well. We have a custom process in-house where we store the doc on site, the incident to. We store the doc on site in a schedule, in a custom screen in CDT. When staff mark down the wrong doc on site in their activities, which does affect our billing, we compare it to the schedule and we correct their activities. It's not a clinical piece of information. They put down that no doc was in-house today. Maybe they thought that they didn't need to put the doc on site. Maybe they didn't know that that doctor was there today. But we fix them before they go out the door, and we do that through a stored procedure. In our agency, we also define episode types through automation. So we provide behavioral health services and developmental services and early support services. So we've got a lot of different episode types, and those episode types are based on what programs those clients are enrolled in. And rather than staff having to remember every time programs change, do I need to go change the episode type? We've automated that for them. We've actually made that field read-only so that they don't need to be bothered with it. They need to see it, but they don't need to determine it because they're already going to enter the programs. They're already maintaining that. They don't really need to maintain the same information in two different places, so we've automated that for them. So, and that's about it. If you can run a report and print it out and hand it to someone and say, here, I need you to change all these to what the report says, or anything this report says I need you to enter, then you should be able to automate it through stored procedures, either scheduling them or giving staff the ability to execute those stored procedures in WinDesi buttons. That's it.
So since you're using automation to set up the grid for processing services,
Yes.
what are you doing to ensure that all services are getting processed?
Do you ever look at that? I mean, there are services that don't get processed.
What I mean by that is, so an example would be, you wrote your script so detailed that you're including like programs that should be brought in. What happens if you create a new program, you forget to do that? What cleanup tools you use to ensure that there's nothing sitting out there with an old date range or anything weird that you didn't get?
We use SSRS reports, so we have data integrity reports that will catch those things, and it will automatically email those reports to our billing staff, who will then notify IT
How are you
this isn't
looking at
working.
it, though? Like, what would be your criteria to find something that didn't get processed over?
Where status doesn't equal D.
Based off the date range, you're
Or-
trying to look at, things that are older than a couple weeks, since that seems to be your processing time frame?
However they ask for that type of report, they can run it manually with different date ranges if they so choose, but you can do anything over a month, and then they can review it to see, oh, well, yeah, I just reprocessed that yesterday. I'm planning on processing it back through today.
So your billing staff manages that directly on their own?
Well, that's the great thing about SSRS reports is that it'll send it to them through email, and then they can then follow up with the staff actually doing the tasks. Or wait till tomorrow, run the report again. Now those items aren't there anymore. Yep.
With the automation of the tagging, are you doing any other checks to make sure that all the documentation that's required?
Lots of them. Lots of them. I could not fit it all on one screen. So when we have a ton of different data integrity reports that we've written over the years. And each one of those reports, if you're familiar with Crystal reports, use a view. So all of our different data integrity reports are a view. So there's one here, signed before date of service. It happens. It happens a lot. I don't understand how it happens a lot, but it happens. So we have a view that will tell us if the activity was signed before the date of service. So I'm telling it in here, if the unique ID of that active work record is in that view, please don't post it over. We're going to unlock that and we're going to send it back to staff and say, you need to either correct the date or something happened because you signed it in advance. But yes, client time greater than staff time. That's another view that we have to check for that data integrity issue. If the active work is in that view, don't post it over. We have actually a lot more of them in our particular one that I just couldn't fit on the screen. So I took out a lot of them, but yes, absolutely. RCD, progress note integrity, activities that require notes and signatures, staff haven't done them yet. I don't want to post it over. So we have a data integrity report and a view that identifies those activities, and then our posting over excludes those from that process. Yes, absolutely. We have a lot of data integrity checks in there, and then all of those reports are followed up on by other staff. And when they're ready, they will post over. But until they're ready, they're going to sit out there. And some of them sit out there for quite some time, just waiting for someone to answer an email or a voicemail. Just fix it. Absolutely. Thank you. Anything else? All right. Well, that's all I have for today. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening.